So Jung basically laid out that the development of a human being, or maybe a better way of thinking about it, the development of a human's consciousness across life can be compared to the cycle of a sun during the day. Okay. And it starts like in the early hours of the morning before the sun has risen. And this is like, let's say, when the clock strikes midnight and we go into the new day, it's like a human being is born. But until like 6, 7 a.m., the sun doesn't rise. We're in darkness, right? We're in a new day, but we're in darkness. And he says this is like childhood or childhood unconsciousness when we don't really have any individual problems. We're not really aware of our individual self. We are hugely reliant logistically and psychologically on our parents. And Jung says we're not really psychologically born until we reach a state of adolescence or we become conscious of our individual self in the world, that I am different to you and I'm different to my parents and I'm different to the rest of my family and I'm separate. I'm a separate entity in reality. And he sees that as like the sun rising and consciousness awakening, right? Just like the light of the sun begins to illuminate the world. And he says that though consciousness is great, it's bright, it's light, it's the ability to see and understand the world and create your own relationship with things, it comes at a sacrifice. And the sacrifice is you begin to develop your own individual problems because there's conflict in yourself. He says when you kind of, as a child, when you first become conscious in adolescence, you repress your like instinctual way of being and you start thinking about what the right way to be is. You start comparing yourself to the social environment. Insecurities develop, anxieties develop, feelings of inferiority develop. And he said these similar themes are a lot of what the first story of Genesis are trying to get across. When Adam and Eve become conscious, one of the first things is they realize they're naked. They realize they're inferior. They realized that their life and their position in the world is uncertain. And that's very similar to when human beings become really conscious of their own individual self in the world. And he says that this second part, let's say, when the sun has risen, he calls it the morning of life. And he says it lasts from about adolescence or when we first become conscious of ourselves to 35 to 40 years old is when he kind of puts down an estimate of when the morning of life ends. And he said, this is all about establishing your ego consciousness or concretizing your ego is the phrase he uses, where you do all the kind of similar things that we would think about today that define adult life, right? You try and establish a career, you establish a relationship, you have your own children, you get a home of your own, all those material kind of milestones that indicate that you're a person in the world with your own authority and your own the circumstances you've created yourself. And that's the morning of life. That's until the sun, say, has risen up until 12, 1 o'clock, where it's at its brightest, when it's established itself in the sky, in the brightest, warmest possible like circumstances for that day. And that's the morning of life for human beings. But then he says that human life reaches a point where the demands or the intentions of the morning no longer serve us. And he says this is when, at that sort of 35 to 40 year mark, although I'm a bit sort of skeptical about that, you shift your focus from your own future or like the possibilities of the future in your life to the end of your life. You start thinking about slowing down, settling down. You start thinking about death. You start thinking about the time running out rather than there being a huge expanse of time in front of you. And Jung calls this the afternoon of life. And he said it's less appreciated and less discussed than the morning, because the morning's all flashy and about growth and success and establishing your place in the world, whereas the afternoon of life is more about seeing what's within you that's beyond ego consciousness, or trying to develop wider consciousness, wider meaning in life. Just like how the sun in the afternoon isn't as bright or as warm as in the middle of the day, but it also has its own beauty to it because it descends into a sunset, which is something magical, which we all appreciate. And like I say, it's not warm, it's not as bright as the sun in the day, but the sunset has something beautiful in it that the sun the rest of the day doesn't possess. And he said human beings are like that. And he says the danger is when people don't see or appreciate the different intentions of the afternoon of life and they try and instill the same principles from the morning, they miss out on the beauty of the sunset of life, let's say. They miss out on viewing death as a goal, or they miss out on seeing the wisdom that can be gained in in that latter stage of life when you have all the time to question who you really are beyond the material things and the social persona, let's say. And he says a lot of people get stuck looking back into the morning and having regrets of how they lived the morning of life that prevents them from really embracing the afternoon. And there's this quote that I've written here on this shared page we have where he talks about this problem of people not stepping into the afternoon of life like voluntarily and still looking back to the morning. And he says, we must not forget that only a very few people are artists in life. That the art of life is the most distinguished and rarest of all arts. Whoever succeeded in draining the whole cup with grace. So for many people, all too much unlived life remains over. Sometimes potentialities which they could never have lived with the best of wills. And so they approach the threshold of old age with unsatisfied claims which inevitably turn their glances backward. And then the last stage, the fourth stage, is when the sun has gone down and we're back into unconsciousness. This is extreme old age, when again you don't have any of your individual problems anymore. It's very akin to a childlike state. You're reliant on others just because your physical health or your cognitive health has declined that much, and your light slowly diminishes and you leave the human experience. So that was a long ramble, but I think it's such a lovely analogy, and I think it makes that shift from like establishing yourself and striving in life to a more internal exploration, let's say, and seeing what's beyond that like material persona in the afternoon of life. So yeah, tell me what you think, if anything like sprang to mind.
It's definitely the best analogy I've heard about consciousness. I'm just gonna firstly kind of translate everything so that I have understood. So by consciousness, we're kind of meaning the our self-awareness, our morality, our ability for abstract thoughts, our identity, our ability to understand how others perceive us, all those kind of quite remarkable things that humans are capable of that the rest of the animal kingdom aren't.
Mm.
And when you're in the darkness, it's the night before the sun's rising, and you're a child, and you're this, and it's dark because a lot of yourself is unknown, and you are just soonly discovering the light. You're just a speck of light that is about to increase.
And you're also at this point, you're governed by instinct more than like individual consciousness. Like so he writes about also that in childhood, very early childhood, often children talk in the third person before they start using the word I. They use their name to describe themselves. And he's saying that's because they have no concept of an ego yet. They can see they see themselves as not like in possession of themselves, if that makes sense. They're not conscious that they are a separate entity. They're instinctual, like many of the other animals in the animal kingdom. And this is why we glorify childhood in many ways when we look back, because we lacked the problems of self. We lacked the conflict of self. We lacked the feelings of inferiority and anxiety that comes with consciousness that Adam and Eve felt when they ate the forbidden fruit and they realized they were naked. Sorry, I just thought I'd jump in there.
Yeah, that's good. So children only kind of develop the children are still speaking in the third person until sort of 10 or something.
I don't know. I don't know the exact thing on that, but I just know that he added at the beginning of the book that just basically we could summarize it that before a child reaches adolescence, they don't really have their own full ego. They develop it as they get older because they realize that's what everyone else does, and they start using the word I. But it's not as established. When you're in adolescence, you realize that there is a separate you from everybody else that can be evaluated differently and that experiences the world differently.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then we go through the morning of life, which is this increase in the sun until it reaches its peak. So this is when you're developing rapidly in school and you're learning, and your brain is essentially what is basically growing. It's you're developing so many cells so fast, but it's very gradual. It's it is like a slow introduction to the problems of life and how you have some responsibility for that. So I'm guessing that's kind of ages between, well, when you're like, when it's completely dark, it's going to be like sort of 0 to 5 or something. And then that's going to be more towards like, the morning of life is probably like 5 to 12 or something. And then you probably have this long peak. I reckon the peaks like goes into your 20s and maybe into your 30s and all sorts,
Mm.
where you're just like peak consciousness, like you're never gonna be this smart again, or you're never gonna be this smart, um this healthy, this like sharp, and this is where the humans thrive and the big problems are done. And I also picked how there was like a distinction that you made about how after that phase you then kind of you you live or you move towards when the sun sets.
Mm.
You start thinking about that, and I think there's a kind of difference between uh, pre kind of afternoon where you're thinking about yourself kind of, and
Mm.
then or living for yourself or living in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and then after post afternoon you're going to be thinking about children, family, kind of bigger problems when your like cortex has evolved and you have access kind of to the question of what is the most important thing and what is important in your life changes significantly. And
Yeah.
then we kind of fade out again to death, and I think it's beautiful because it's what happens. It's a slow kind of decline of cognitive ability, and you get a glimpse of that in the afternoon. Maybe your memory starts going a little bit, and when into the evening you're using your children to help with like simple household tasks,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, you're slowly fading away your brain. So it's a beautiful analogy, and is one I'm gonna really like continue to hold because I think it explains it so well. And
Well, yeah, I think a key distinction um, that I think you'll agree with me with between the morning and the afternoon, right, is the morning of life. And I think it's less like stuck on an age range. I mean, Jung said that we transition into the afternoon about 35, 40, and maybe way people could think about it is when people usually hit a midlife crisis is when they're stepping into the afternoon of life and they're not ready to, right, which is usually around midlife, around the early 40s or something like that. But for me, it's more about your stance on your life philosophically. So the morning of life is when you're establishing yourself, right? You're preparing for your future life. You are, let's say, I don't know, validating your existence that's separate from everybody else and everything else. You become financially stable. You aim to start a family. You aim to have your own home. You aim to establish yourself in the world as an individual, right? And then the afternoon of life, which is so interesting, is kind of all about de-establishing that self and questioning what's beyond it. Because if you're holding on to that material self that you built in the morning so tightly, then you're not prepared for death. Because death is when all of that is taken away. And it's all about kind of developing consciousness that's deeper than just Joel Clifton or Jacob Matthew per se. It's understanding who that awareness is really deep down inside that's beyond the ego. And Jung says that we need a concept of life after death, or dancing with death, or coming to terms with death, as much as the body needs like vital nutrients like salt and water and nutrients, right? psychologically we need to see death as a kind of goal, I guess, and craft our approach to the second half of life to be prepared for death. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I think it's true, because the intentions of me at 21 are going to be so different to my intentions at 51, because if they were the same, I'd just kind of be running on the same treadmill for no real means.
Yeah, I mean, he referred to like few people kind of design their life like art, and that's probably what it is in the second half. And you said about kind of you detach from the self and the ego that you built in the first half, and you kind of make amends where you make amends and you question it, and because you are growing. And I also like I just really like this metaphor of the sunset because it kind of takes it consciousness externally. I know Jung was big about the kind of collective unconsciousness, and it kind of takes it away from like that we're the ones that are doing it, and that it's the actual world itself and the beauty of life that's actually kind of developing us through nurture and through like external things. And yeah, that's why I think it's really works.
Well, it's one of those where we look on age as something negative. I mean, me and my mum were talking about this a lot on the phone last week, because, well, I was actually talking about my dad turning 60 and going, well, that's like he's now at the end of midlife and is into the last, like the final stage, let's say, which is 60 to 80 or 90 or however lucky we get to live on this planet. And my mum having similar thoughts, as she's like in her mid 50s now, and talking about how she wants to grow into the elderly stage of her life and to develop, she called it her crone energy, which is like the wise old lady in the tribe that shares eternal wisdom to everybody and is a figure of peace, of creation, of divine femininity. And I think that's in opposition to the way we think about age in this society today. We do that, you have anti-aging products, or you have, and just general disrespect for the elderly in society, I feel like. Yeah. And actually, there's beauty in those stages just as much as there is in youth or in midlife. Just in the same way that the sun rise is beautiful and the sun in the middle of the day is the most warm and the most bright, but there's something also about a sunset that is equally, if not more beautiful. And I think you have to step into endings, not just in your life, but in any context. You need to step into an end voluntarily and courageously, because you can't avoid it. Your life's going to end. You're going to age. So why not age gracefully? But like Jung poses that the problem is when people don't fulfill the intentions of the morning, they don't establish themselves, they can't then like access this second stage in the afternoon, because they're just floating around, or when they get to that age, they'll just be looking back with regret and remorse of all the things they didn't do and the person they didn't become. So it's complicated. It's complicated, but like you say, it's a lovely frame, and it's one of those ideas that I think we'll think about and we'll talk about as the months and years go by.
Mm. So we think about age negatively. Um, what do you think it would look like if we weren't to think about age negatively?
I think we would see like elderly members of society, or let's say culture, and our tribe, whether that's your family or your friends or your network generally, we would see them so much more as sources of wisdom.
Mm.
Like, I feel like there's a reason that, two of Jung's archetypes are the wise old woman and the wise king, right? These are mentor characters, um, that guide you, that have lived so much life, and it doesn't matter what specifically they did in that life, in their career, or what they did with their family, or where they're from in the world. They have wisdom that they've accrued, 60, 70, 80 years of wisdom, and I feel like there's so much to learn from that. There's so much, and we just, yeah, I think there's a general, I don't know, it's an extreme disrespect, but it's just I don't think we value what the elderly can teach us as much as we should. And I
Mm.
feel like maybe in the past, the older members of the tribe, that their purpose was to relay wisdom. from the past.
Yeah.
Tell stories from the past. Give the lessons from the past. And that was the value they provided to the tribe, even if physically they weren't as capable as the younger adults.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Their purpose is to pass on the wisdom, and we don't fully utilize that as younger people. And I think they also, because they do get something out of it as well, they do love to be the teacher. And I think about it with kind of older people, and I don't know how accurate this is, but in India you get like an older person that's like really, really cared for, and they're more kind of around the family, and kind of they're kind of the center. And if I compare that maybe to Britain, where I mean, yeah, I think in Britain old people are given up on,
Yeah,
and
no, but it's true. I mean, like, obviously we're generalizing here and we don't know the facts, but just off like the gist I get and the assumptions I have, I feel like in the eastern areas of the world, the family unit is a lot more tight, and that the family tree is a lot more, I don't know, valued, and the elders are, like you say, cared for. I mean, in this country, the fact that care homes exist is just the epitome of it. And obviously, sometimes logistically, you can't look after your parent or your grandparent or whatever, and they have to go into a home. And some homes are lovely, but just that idea is just it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I can't imagine, our ancestors or someone in the East putting their elderly person in a home to be looked after, and they only see them once a week or something. It's just, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not claiming to know everything. I'm just speculating. It's just interesting, isn't it?
I think the cycle of life is more connected though in the Eastern world. Like
Yeah.
with uh, yeah, you're right. I mean, I've never seen a care home in India, and I mean, you might ask what's so bad about a care home, but it kind of like it kind of it categorizes that old person to just hang around with old people. Well, old people don't like hanging around with old people. I don't know if like generally, um, because because yeah, um,
Could you say though on that maybe Eastern cultures are more appreciative of the afternoon of life and what that stage serves of questioning what's beyond our individual ego, having more sort of, I don't know, religious and philosophical ways of thinking and being, and developing wider consciousness beyond the individual. That narrative runs through loads of Eastern culture and Eastern literature and Eastern religion. Uh,
yeah.
and I guess it may be far more appreciated than it is here, because even as I'm saying these things, I'm like, this is just never talked about in our world.
So when your mum asks herself, like, I'm getting almost to 60, 65, like, what do I do with myself? Like, well, what do I do? And her answer was to be the be the wise woman and
Yeah,
teach.
we talked about the wise old woman archetype actually from Jungian work. That it's the mother of the whole tribe, essentially, having that real pure, powerful, feminine maternal energy and being a source of wisdom, and a source of spiritual light for all those around her. And I'm like, well, that's how you do it. That's it. You smashed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think about the archetype of maybe not the wise king, but like the secondary father.
Mm,
And I think about, I think it's a good example is in the Good Will Hunting film where Robin Williams kind of helps. Uh, what's he called? I can't
Will
remember.
Hunting. Well,
Yeah,
Will Hunting. I want to say that's his name because the film. Yeah,
yeah. Robin Williams
Matt
helps Will,
Damon's character.
and he offers love and guidance to whereas Will's biological father was,
Abusive.
well, he failed
Or
kind of.
I think he died. I think Will was an orphan. Yeah.
Mm, and I think that's a good example of what we can do for the afternoon of life. You become that character, and you help the hero move beyond the shadow of the biological father. And this is seen with Dumbledore and Harry Potter, Morpheus in the Matrix. Um, and I think it's really important because sometimes the hero or us as individuals, we want something to worship, and sometimes we don't have a religious god. And so I think something that can come into that is a big role model that you could kind of that you're worshipping because you really want to be like, and that's what the secondary father acts as, and you kind of manifest um yourself in that higher self that you think about. So yeah.
Yeah, we need mentors. We need the right mentors. Um, Whether that's, people you come across that take you under their wing and that are older than you and guide you on life decisions and things, or I think about it in my life and I go, well, my secondary father slash mentor is like this Frankenstein monster of coaches, older friends, like thinkers and public intellectual figures, and even philosophers of past centuries, all into one that have guided me into this worldview. But if I'd never seek them out, or let's say if I'd never been noticed by these people, they'd never cast a hand out to help me out, who knows where I would have been in my life. And what worries me is where is people's where what is the source of people's mentorship? I think it's something Robert Greene writes a lot about in Mastery, isn't it? Finding the right mentor, seeking the right mentor. And I think about all great figures in history that I follow, reading Jung at the moment about a doctor who wanted him as his assistant in Zurich, working with like mental health patients, where Jung developed a lot of his earlier theories there. It's like that was somebody who gave somebody a leg up, who then became one of the greatest thinkers in history, or in the in the realm of psychology and religion and stuff. And if people's mentor or like source of mentorship today is just like TikTok and influencers, or like shit they watch on the TV, or I'm just like, it's interesting, isn't it? How much of that carves your life as well? Who you listen to, who you follow, who guides you.
Well, I generally think people tend to live through us. I think that's a good way to think about it. And so the TikTok influence you are watching is kind of living through you, and by that it's unconscious. That's what I mean. Because I think when someone, it's the same kind of thing as the mentor that passes away. I think when someone passes away, you can have a lot of thoughts about them watching over you and them still being alive in some part. Some people have that. For me, the only thing I do have is that there is this feeling. Well, there's a thing I like to think about how people kind of live through me, because I think it is kind of true to a degree where you get characteristics like my granddad on my dad's side, who is a very good strategist. He played a big part in the war, and he
Yeah.
played chess and things like that. And so I think that's where I get a lot of that from.
Mm.
So I think that is that's also a big role of the wise king, getting into when you come towards the end of the sunset of life. It's like, how can you be that guy that then lives through the rest of your family?
Well, yeah, you can think about it. Well, yeah, with your ancestors and with your mentors, in each way that they guide you. Now, whether that's an inheritance of their characteristic just biologically, or whether it's just by osmosis, by being around them and being under their mentorship, you pick up these characteristics, and then you go out into the world and develop them and use them. It's kind of like you take a fragment of that person with you. You take a little piece of their soul and you continue its journey in this experience, in this realm. And it's like that, in the Lion King, where um like Simba rejects his hero's calling. He rejects his hero's journey, and he lives in the jungle with Timon and Pumbaa, the meerkat and the warthog, and just sings this song called Hakuna Matata and nothing matters. Um and then he and while he's doing that, his society, his calling, where he's really supposed to be, is being taken over by the evil king, by Scar, by the evil uncle, and his father died, and Scar led to that. Scar orchestrated that death and blamed it on Simba. He's not following his calling, but then he has that song, doesn't he? Where it's called "They Live in You," and he sees his father's reflection in the water, in the puddle, and then he realizes it's him. And then he sees his father's face in the sky, and his dead father talks to him. It's like he's then called to carry out his hero's journey for his ancestors, for his dead father, because it's right, because he's now, his dead father is living through him, like you said. And we do, I guess, in in doing what we're supposed to do in life, in doing courageous shit, and trying to build something meaningful, we are doing justice to our ancestors and to our mentors and to the people that have guided and influenced us.
Mm. I think this is a pretty good point. This is a good place to introduce one of my points about. I tried to. First of all, have you watched the film Coraline?
Years ago, is that the like weird Tim Burton? Is it Tim Burton, the director? The girl with button eyes. It's like a similar kind of aesthetic to A Night Before Christmas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So essentially, I'll give you a very, very quick summary. So there's this girl who doesn't have a good relationship with her parents because her parents don't really spend the time with her, and her parents are very distant and they don't give her what she wants. So then she one day finds this little door into another world that is exactly the same as her current reality, with all the same house, the same garden, but it's more exciting and it's more, she has what she wants. She's given everything. And her parents, they cook her like amazing food, and they spend all the time with her, and all her desires essentially met. But then it gets really dark, and with that, her mum introduces her to some button eyes and wants her to sew it on. But within that that would mean that she would basically sell her soul to her mum and
Mm.
live in that world forever and just have the pleasure, be but literally selling her soul to her mum. And then she finds out about that, and she has a very quick. Uh, she declines the button eyes, but she's not allowed back into her world with the first parents, with the more boring normal parents. So then she plays a game with her mum, and where she has to do a couple of difficult things. She has to find these like gems or something. There's like three of them, and there's this cool scene where she's I think it's like I think she's trying to find them like anywhere, and some of the characters help, and there's all these. Yeah, it's done for sort of dramatize some things. But then eventually she wins and she leaves, and she gets back into the house, and then she's very grateful once she's back in her normal mother's house. So that's kind of a quick summary. But I kind of tried to think about the psychology of this movie and why it impacts children so hard, and why it is actually quite a significant film. Because what I really like in it is there's themes like selling your soul, and that's never been done really in the children's movie that I can think of apart from this. I've never seen that in a children's context, and it's done in this way because, well, why button eyes? Well, to give someone your eye is, the window to the soul, and so
Mm.
allow someone to really like penetrate that with buttons. It's quite a mad thing. So, well, what does that mean for the child? Well, once you have those button eyes, you have lost your individuality. You have lost your independence, kind of. You have fully given yourself to this character,
You also
and so
can't see. You're blinded from reality as well.
yeah, yeah, and I think about this in like a everyday life context of peer pressure, and I think that could be kind of a way of that children maybe do sell themselves for something, because when you're a kid, you get introduced to crime and you join it because you're peer pressured into it, and you kind of allow people to give you button eyes, and you're giving up by doing that. You're giving up your curiosity, your individuality for something that's dark, but has that nice reward of being in that lovely world, because you suddenly have what you want. And so there's also another thing that I found very interesting about this character of the other mother. So the other mother in Coraline lets her do whatever she wants. If you're naughty, she'll be fine with it. Nothing happens. There's no repercussions of it. Like the mum literally allows her to like misbehave, and like yeah, the other mother is like imagine misbehaving and being no repercussions, and that's what the other mother basically does. And she like essentially becomes very tyrannical. This other mother, she keeps the child to herself and without letting her go and adventure into the world. And eventually, there's this mad scene where I think this is probably the scariest scene where she goes into where she turns into a spider, and there's this web, and it's this very interesting.
Very Freudian, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, so I think it's not just of the mother; it's kind of like it's the whole world. Like food is tastier, like the parents are more attentive, everything's more brighter, more interesting. And I've thought about that, and it's kind of like when you do like some kind of drug and everything is enhanced. But when you are doing that, you are making, well, there's a price you pay, isn't it? Uh, but that evil is kind of masked away, and all you see is the kind of dream reality. The evil is kind of a bit hidden, and um, yeah, I think that's I think that's mine and my thoughts. But I thought it's quite an interesting film in the context of children.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I'd like to watch it actually. I'd like to watch it and see if I pick up those similar themes. Yeah, it's this moral message, isn't it? That unearned pleasure. If you indulge in unearned pleasure, you'll be selling your soul. Or there'll always be a consequence. Or if something seems too good to be true, then it's probably too good to be true. You're probably sacrificing something elsewhere, and you may not realize it yet until you look back in hindsight. And I think it's really important, like that these themes and these narratives are expressed in like children's films. Like I remember this film as a kid not wanting to watch it because I thought it was scary. So maybe it doesn't have to be as like I don't know dark uh or as extreme as this film, but those kind of narratives, those kind of moral messages, they need to be put in children's like media and good heroes that children identify with, male and female, like characters that show a good way of being, a good way of being a person in the world. Because those influences are huge.
Yeah, it's like you kind of tried to skip part of the sunset. It's
Mm,
it's the same thing with her and the kind of pleasure reality to which I think Simbra and McKenna Matata allude to.
mm.
It's yeah, it's that same sort of thing.
But there's always that drive, isn't there? There's the drive to not adopt the responsibility of your own hero's journey. Like if you think about in our modern lives, you can float if you want to. You kind of can. Like if you're comfortable enough to be born into the average family, you can coast through life. You won't be happy. You'll get by, right? Just, but you won't have a meaningful life. But there is this drive to just not try hard because of fear of failure or really low self-esteem or self-confidence or self-belief. And yeah, you can just sort of sit and be numbed by everything around you and just live in the dark, I guess, and not really realize what your calling might be, or if you have a vocation, you might not realize that you need to follow it. But like I was thinking about this in preparation for my lecture at the weekend. You don't want shortcuts in life. That's a lie. People think they want shortcuts. No, you really don't. And if anything, do real shortcuts exist? Like shortcuts to the things we really want. Do they actually exist? Or do they just masquerade as the thing you actually want? And in reality, that you're selling a part of your soul. Whether that's, You want the feeling of adventure, and so you sit and you simulate that in a video game, or you simulate that by watching a Netflix series or a film. Now, there's a time and a place for those things, obviously. But if you live your life vicariously through those things, it's not the same as your life being an actual adventure, or the sort of whatever the thing you really want is, whether that's your romance and intimacy, or deep meaning in your life, or established, a high self-esteem state of being. Like, there are no shortcuts to those things. There are things that pretend to be shortcuts, but they're just not real. And you do sell a part, like an important part of yourself, I think, if you indulge too much in these things.
Yeah. Joel, tell me about Chesterton's passage about the paradoxical.
Yes. So I found this little paragraph from Chesterton about courage.
Who's Chesterton?
I think he's some English writer, Don, or poet, I want to say. Let's Google this, shall we? So G.K. Chesterton was an influential English journalist, author, poet, and social critic. And
Okay.
he was around from like 1874 to 1936. So in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. Anyway, he's got this paragraph about courage. And he said courage is a contradiction. Courage is a paradox. Because to be courageous, you need both a strong desire to live, but also a willingness to die at the same time, right? You need to strive to survive, but with also a furious indifference to life itself in order to be courageous. To put this in, to try and explain that why this makes sense, right? If you're clinging on to life too tightly, you'll be frozen into cowardice, right? But if you're also too nonchalant about your life, you will just give up the power of will and allow death to just take you away. You need to dance with it. You need to both strive for life and be willing to die in order to be truly courageous. Like, think about this in terms of the soldier that finds themselves stuck behind enemy lines. Right? If you stay still, frozen by cowardice because you're clinging on to life and you don't get out of your hiding place, well, eventually you'll die anyway. You'll starve or you'll be found and killed. But if you're too nonchalant about life, you won't think about the fine details. You'll go out there expecting to be fine, and then you won't be concentrating. You won't have the right tactics or the right strategy, and you'll be killed anyway. You need to have this simultaneous contradiction between wanting to live and being okay with dying. And then I thought about this paradox, and I thought, well, that applies to loads and loads of things. Now, it doesn't have to be life or death situations. It can be situations where there's an outcome you want, right? If you really want to win a game of basketball, you also at the same time have to be okay with losing. Because if you're not okay with losing, you're going to be frozen to make any kind of mistake. You're going to be scared to take a shot. You're going to be, your head will be instantly down if the opponents score on you. You have to have both these two things at the same time. Or in art, right? You might strive for perfection in a piece, whether that's a piece of music or a painting or a poem. But you also have to have indifference to whether you actually reach that perfection, because you know it's an ideal and it's not really real. And if you hold on too much to that perfectionism, you won't create. But if you don't care about it being perfect, you also won't create. Or in another example I use was in parenthood, right? You want to strive to guide your children to be the most like virtuous, psychologically adjusted, generous, kind person you possibly can. But you also have to understand that if they don't go down the path you'd like in life, you can't hold on to them. You can't hold on to that and fixate on the outcome too much, because there's nothing more toxic for a child's development than a really overbearing parent. And this shows up in many, many different places in life. So I'll pause there and see if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, it's life is very paradoxical. It reminds me of Hegel's opposite theory from the other week, but it's kind of like you have to care and not care at the same time, which is this word called indifference, which I didn't know before like, a couple months ago, but I've talked about it a lot through the sales of context. No, through the context of sales,
Yes.
and it's essentially like it's one of the most powerful things you can do when you're trying to sell to someone. Is like you you don't care at, at all about the outcome, and you're basically you're it's taught to me in indifference was taught to me in sales as being the midst between being this really pushy person and being this really easy, chill, like nonchalant person, and you're in the middle of that. And when you do that, you have kind of the best of both worlds. If they need you to talk about something and educate you, then you can, and you need to educate them with a bit more information. You can do that. If it doesn't look, there's someone that's really low energy, then you just match their energy. Essentially, we're taught something about indifference is you're not, when I try and sell to someone, I'm only trying to be 10% more energetic than them. Because if I'm if they're really low impulse, really low energy, and I'm like, "Ugh," then it's gonna overwhelm them. So you just want to be just about above, and then you eventually like really slowly lift them up, because essentially you're supposed to get slightly more and more energetic as the cell goes on, and then their impulse slowly rises. And so it's something that essentially, to me, indifference is like it's picking, it's adapting yourself onto people, but doing it in the right way. So when you meet a new stranger and they seem really into uh, audio systems, but they're not very into makeup, then you're going to be indifferent and you're going to adapt yourself onto that person. You're not going to talk about makeup, but you're going to talk about audio systems. And I think with courage, it's just a perfect thing that's going to be in the middle. And yeah, it's something that is it was very new to me, this idea, but it's really important.
Yeah, it's also in large part, comes back to what I'm going to talk about on Sunday at the lecture. The fight between caring and not caring. The the battle between strategy and focus and nonchalance, because you need both. Like you're right, and it makes sense in your context as well. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to be active with that person. You need to try and get across what you want to get across, and that requires focus and intention and strategy. But also you have to have nonchalance, because you can't be forcing it on them. You can't
Mhm.
seem desperate. And also, if you don't get the outcome you want, you can't let your head drop about that, because you have 100 other people that you're going to talk to that day. So you have to be nonchalant about the outcome. And it's what I'll talk about on Sunday with in the approach of high performance. Strategy and focus in the training, nonchalance in the performance. It's like that, trying to combine those two worlds, the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, whatever, whatever. And so I was trying to question with this, with Chesterton's idea, and then branching out, I went, well, is there a counterpoint to this? Is there ever a time where it's not paradoxical? And I really struggled, because I thought to myself, if you're ever trying to fixate on an outcome, you will just freeze, right? You will just freeze. Even in situations of life and death, right? To survive, you have to take some kind of risk, right? To pursue life in the face of death, you have to risk. And risk does involve a level of indifference to death, right? You have to stare death in the face and move towards the thing anyway. And death can be failure in this context. It can be loss. It can be whatever the negative or non-ideal outcome in that situation is. But you have to be willing to stare it in the face to get the thing you want. You have to stare the opposite of the thing you want in the face in order to get the thing you want. Stare losing in the face to win. Stare failure stare failure in the face to succeed, and stare death in the face to really live. Um, and yeah, I love this narrative.
I'm trying to think what it means to the average person to stare death in the face. I'm trying to think of an example.
It can be you can like squash it down to any mundane scenario. It applies. Like in your job, you have to do a presentation in front of a board meeting or whatever, in front of 8 people or something, right? Staring death in the face is staring humiliation and failure in the face. Staring the possibility that you may mess up and freeze and get nervous in the face, and doing the thing anyway. Like pursuing the outcome you want, but with a willingness to go, you know what, this might go terribly. I think about it at the weekend with what I'm about to do. Like it could go really badly. I could freeze. I could lose my train of thought. but I have to stare those nerves in the face, that possibility of failure in the face, in order to succeed. And this expands out to any situation when we try and do something in a sporting world, in the world of creativity, in the world of our careers, or even in our relationship. You have to you have to try and commit to somebody, be emotionally sensitive to that person, give them a great experience, be kind, be 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 open, like listen and care for them. But also you have to have an awareness that you may be rejected. Those feelings may be not reciprocated. And it's all life's about calculated risk, man, because everything's a trade off, everything's a compromise, everything involves risk.
Is it memento mori? Remember I will die or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we come back to the idea that every decision we make is down to the fear of death or
Bro, yeah.
to some.
It's 100%. 100%. I mean, that's a lot of uh that's a lot of what the denial of death was about. But I've got a friend, right? I met him quite recently over the last few months through basketball. Like, he's a good kid. He's like 18. He's just found the sport in the last year. He's now coming to the uni that I'm at, and I'm sort of looking forward to training with him and seeing him develop. But like, he got hit by a truck when he was like a tiny kid, and like lost one of his legs up from the hip, basically, a very high amputee. And he said to me the other day, he was like, he asked me, "Do I think about death?" And I was like, "Yeah, from time to time, philosophically, I ponder on it, I guess." And he was when I just think I'm living on borrowed time. He's like, "I should have died when that truck hit me, and now I'm just living on borrowed time. So I just try and appreciate everything." And I'm just like, damn, for like an 18-year-old kid to say something like that, I'm like, that's cool, man. That's so cool. So cool.
Yeah. One of my dad's friends had a lot of people passing recently, well, in the last couple of years, and he's ever since he's been very like live everything to the its max, and he's in a position where he's got lots of money, so he just goes traveling and climbs a bit of Everest and shit like that. And I think you got to, but it'd be nice if we could do that without having something tragic happen first.
Yeah, it's really hard to keep that in mind, isn't it? When you're not in a state of loss, to really keep in mind how like fragile everything is. Everything. Like I've been reflecting on this the past few weeks. So my first year in London was very different to how my second year has begun and how my second year will probably be. And I didn't presume that at the time. When I was 6 months into being here, I thought the next 18 months would be the same. And it's not got any worse or any better, so to speak. It's just different because I'm different and my life circumstances are different. And the lesson I take from that is when something is going well, or just something is the way it is, it's always only temporary. If ever we like elude ourselves into thinking that things will change, elude ourselves to think things won't change, sorry, they always will. Like, things just evolve, and whatever you're living in now is the only time you can live in that era of your life, in that chapter, at that age, doing that thing. And you never know what you might be experiencing now, maybe the thing you reminisce on the most in 10, 20, 30, 40 years time. So we have to try and fucking squeeze the juice out of it, man. But it's hard to do when you're tired and you're hungry and you're stressed and whatever. It's really hard to hold on to.
Yeah, everything is falling. Let's me and you and the viewers should take a deep breath. That will never be uh this intelligent, this young, this good looking ever again.
Exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, I reckon I'm ready to end this episode here if you're
Yeah, man. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
cool. Well, again, as always, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.